Meeting of the Village Parcel Master Plan. Number 2, review minutes of previous meeting. Does anybody have any corrections or additions?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor? And Bob, you're up.
Okay. I gotta pass a few handouts to you. Thanks. Am I on? I'm on, okay. What I just handed out to you is a summary of comments that we received from various members of the steering committee. And there was a lot of information there, and I tried to kind of synthesize it down to a point of topics we could actually discuss this afternoon. If we tried to talk about every one of the items that came through, I'll probably be here until midnight. So I've tried to make it as brief as possible and salient points to target in terms of what the master plan actually may be in terms of use of the property itself. So Mike was one who'd actually, one of his comments had actually identified some of the various areas on the parcel which will relate as I go through the topics. Identifying area, the two area A's down below as potential municipal use areas. The area, actually, grab my laser pointer. Area, these two areas here for potential municipal uses. Area B for residential development. Areas D, C, E, F, and G, residential and or mixed type uses, as well as then we'll get into areas in terms of what may be potential areas to save for future development. So, but I wanted to be able to run through that. I'll probably wind up popping back and forth between this slide and a slide which has everything that I just handed out to you, so we can kind of go through those items, and if you have questions as to where they are, we'll be able to cover it that way. So Chris, if you go to the next slide. So basically out of the comments that came out, the first item was, basically a takeaway from the visioning sessions that we had, which include the first open house we had here, as well as the that weekend endeavor that we had. So the top takeaways were affordable workforce housing, housing that is a different type, size, affordability from current market values, value off, reserve open space for recreation and public use, future town uses including town hall, and then preserve some land, future use yet to be identified. So those were the takeaways that kind of came out of what we've done to date between the public visioning sessions that we've had. Some of that also correlates to what was a takeaway from all the stakeholder meetings, of which I sent a summary of all those to you earlier, and I won't try and go through all those because we just won't have time, but that helps, I think, so you can understand what we actually did as the committee and the stakeholder groups. But it pretty much follows that same chronology in terms of those 5 items that came out as takeaways. Regarding affordable housing, should engage in discussions with knowledgeable developers in affordable housing market. The other was to engage with Kennebunk Heritage Trust, Housing Trust, to develop outline of plans to facilitate affordable housing. And I think from that one, my takeaway on that comment was to look at what they're trying to do now and how that element may fit into what happens on this parcel to address some of the affordable housing needs. And then the other was a feasibility for development of this site is going to depend upon a mix of smaller lots that will require zoning changes and a mix of higher rate housing to help with infrastructure cost and land. So those are some of the key elements that were takeaways. There were more information regarding the affordable housing, but these, I think, were the 3 key things that kind of fell out in terms of how to look at the parcel. Then open space and recreation, creating walking trails between North Street and School Street that would be held along the outer perimeter, about a 2.5 mile town walking loop that could be incorporated now Some of the trails are already actually there, and just how to enhance some of those. And the other was that the trail should, again, follow along the northerly perimeter so as not to impact the areas identified for future development. So you don't start putting trails through and find out, you've created an issue that you didn't intend to do. The trail should be initiated as soon as possible to provide use, explore potential for state funding, grants, donations, and volunteers, and some options to how to create the trails. Other trails such as bike paths, open space features, parks, et cetera, be reserved to look at as far as the future development occurs and how that may integrate into the space. Thought process is as you start doing some of the development, you may wind up with small pocket parks as part of whatever those development pods actually happen to turn out to be. And then potential areas for reserve for future use to be used for temporary recreational use, 5, 10, or whatever year plan, where some of it is open right now without a lot of expenditure. If you're looking at a 5 to 10 year plan before some of those areas can be utilized, you may be able to regrade it and turn it into a practice field or something like that. I think so. That was what I derived out of that particular comment. And then preserving sensitive environmental areas in the upland buffers for visual enhancement and educational opportunities. So those are really 3 of the key areas in terms of how the property could be utilized and what some of those components were. So in terms of the potential development areas, as we said, the Area A, potential location for town hall and parking. The 2 areas were defined primarily because we don't have a building program at this point to understand what spatial requirements there would be to serve a town hall and parking. So those 2 areas that were shown as Area A right at the entrance off of North Street were identified for the town hall use. Area B is that first area to the right as you go in before the CMP easement, which butts up close to Wallace Woods. In that area to allow for higher end housing, 20,000 square foot lots. It would require a zoning change, more in the text probably. It would help to defray cost of infrastructure and land costs towards smaller lots. Affordable market rate in terms of affordable housing, looking at the price range, and this was taken from Tom's report that he had gone over with you folks the last time, and that is putting housing prices in the 270 to 360,000 range, and that was based on 75%, and I forget what the other part of the market was, but we'll be able to go over that. And it should not be 20%, that should be potential for 20 units using the 20,000 square foot lot requirements. Area C is the area when you cross over the CMP power lines, and that's the area that's tucked up to the left-hand side and closer to Jane Morgan's property, Weintraub's property. In that particular area, looking at a mixed housing and lot size and price range would require a zoning change. Potential for 28 units if you did the 20,000 square foot lots. You reduce the lot size with a mix from 5, 10, and 20,000 square feet, you may be able to get 56. Can I ask you to go back to the previous slide? I just want to make sure. I think I pointed to the wrong side for this Area C. I meant Area C is up this side. Okay. This one here, not the one over there, I'm sorry. So you can go to the next slide. So in Area C, that was the higher density area where you could get potentially 56 units if you mixed with a mix of the various lot sizes. Now this has gone basically looking at what the developable area is and making some quick assumptions in terms of acreage of how you could get those lots. So it's not based on actually having done any layout. It's a combination of what we did during the visioning session to show what the potential for development of the parcel is, and then try to back our way through to come up with some numbers. And I know Mike had worked on some numbers as part of his summary. Area D, mixed housing types, lot sizes, and market value.
Can you just go back to the
Yep,
map when you
sure.
say what area?
I'll tell you
So
what.
people can see
Would you
it.
back me? Okay. So here, Area D is the parcel I initially thought was over by Jane Morgan's property. We'll go back up. So Area D, mixed housing types, lot sizes, and market value. Higher end would be 20,000 square foot, market affordable, 10,000 square foot. Affordable range workforce and downsizing for seniors, so you may get down to, smaller than the 10,000 square foot lot to be.
Just a quick ref, just so I can, 20,000 square feet is in terms of acreage, what's a half acre?
It's about a little less than half an acre.
Which is 20,000?
Yeah.
Right, the 20,000,
A little less than half an acre.
correct.
Thank you.
Where was I? Area D. Yeah, Area E, which is this larger area up in the northerly corner. That one really was a mix of housing types, price point, and should be informed by prior development. So in part of the summary, that would be potentially one of the areas to be reserved for future. And I think part of that comment came down from, we look at the initial phases, how they become developed, what the success is. Basically, you find out what the bugs are, you build your first house and decide you should have built something differently. That type of thing as far as that area, because it is a larger area and it's further out. So obviously, the further out we go, we're talking about all the infrastructure improvements to go on. So Area E would be really an overall mix of the various different housing types, but those numbers would be broken out as you move forward, if that's an area and housing goes out there. Area F is similar to Area C. Chris, can you go back for F? F is, no,
Similarly, E.
this
Yeah.
portion down in here, that backs up to Shawmut Woods, just for point of reference, and the piece below is the McKay property. So uses similar to Area C, inform uses from prior development. So in terms of the density of what could happen in that section, and the mix of lot sizes would be pretty much, you start finding out as you develop any particular phases where you want to tweak that configuration. And then Area G, which is along the long sliver that goes out to School Street. Housing opportunities or other community uses, community gardens, small recreational uses, potential senior housing community, potential residential on much smaller lots. Rezoning change would be required for the small lots, and potential, depending on the lot sizes, somewhere between 14 and 27. And again, all of these scenarios would require you to actually going in and start looking at developing a plan similar to the overall concept we did during the visioning session, to be able to clearly get a better handle. So a lot of assumptions in terms of the number of lots is based on really the acreage itself. And then the potential areas to consider holding for the future, go back, would be, Chris, got to go back to that one from D, E, and F. Go back. So D, which is the parcel closest to the Jane Morgan's property and CMP, and then the larger area, and then this section in here. So basically, it's kind of some discussions in terms of sequence. The issue with developing something up in here first, in earlier stages, obviously means the whole road infrastructure winds up being constructed. So it's a matter of how do you look at, what areas, the intensity of development. And again, with all of these, it doesn't mean that Area C is developed as one parcel by one developer. It could be carved out and defined as different, development pods that could occur on it. Part of that whole visioning session was trying, how do you create a New England sense of village? I better put that down before I point that at somebody. To have an integration of various age groups, so that as well as economic groups, so it becomes a community. So that you're not looking at saying, okay, these are all $500,000 homes here, and these are all seniors tucked up in this corner, and then you've got young families here, and you've got workforce housing here. So it's really looking at an integration. Thank you, that's the word I was looking for. Actually, I think you gave that to me before, and I forgot it. Thank you. So that's kind of a basis on that. And then just to kind of give you a perspective of development of this parcel, I brought in one of the earlier concepts that was done for the old Port Village, just to show you what a build-out was intended for that project. So this is the School Street end. So everything on this side those are all duplex units. And then as we go down to the next one, they were all duplex until we got down to the power line easements, and then we wound up with multiplex. This scenario, which is not the approved scenario, was one of the first ones we came before the planning board with, and it was reduced down. This one was a total of 96 units, including a common meeting facility. They would have had a pool and a clubhouse and that type of thing. So that just kind of shows you the different areas of the site and how they were developed, in terms of giving you kind of an idea of what density may be. Where we were way up with a smaller lot size, you know, under this scenario, we had to meet what the zoning is currently. So the area taken up by those had to meet the lot area requirements. So rather than what we're talking about now is looking at is how you create smaller lots to be able to get the same density, but also to preserve more open space. So this is kind of the direction of what your current zoning would permit. So Chris, we can go to the next slide. So what we did is, because of the overall potential cost for development, we looked at, Laurie and Werner asked us to look at how we might do a phase one type development to be able to take improvements into a certain point and then have the ability to have some income coming in to generate and offset some of the cost. So again, the two lower areas, the area is the red outline. Basically what we did is we divided those into actual parcels, you know, so that we had some context to look at. So like the front parcel, which also includes some of the stream and the setback, is this parcel in here. And then this one comes up and over to the power lines and back down. So the acreage that you'd seen in our previous submissions is different from what you're looking at here. That's why these lots show as bigger sizes. And then for this area over in here, in order to be able to look at the density, taking into consideration when you do your density calculations, you have to deduct wetlands and you can count all your upland areas. So what we did is grabbed that as a parcel to be able to show what the potential development in there. And then the same thing up in here. So where you see kind of the pink and kind of an off pink, basically what it is the lighter shade is where open space was identified in the previous plan that you saw. But when you overlaid the colors, that's what gave it the distinction. So, but the outline of red is the lot, and then the blue identifies where the buildable area is on those particular locations. So with this scenario under current zoning, the first parcel in on the right, you could probably get about 4 lots, which is based on the 40,000 square feet, but you can reduce it down to 20. If you do, I forgot what the percentage of open space you'd have to maintain to be able to do a 20,000 square foot lot area. The same thing up here, the first area B, which on this plan was C on the other. I had kind of divided the parcels so that we're really only looking at infrastructure having to come up to probably about this location here, which is about 1,400 or 1,600 linear feet into the site. In that area, we could potential for 9 lots. And then on the other side, which is identified as Area C, could probably look at a potential of 7 lots. Now with that, the one thing that didn't show up in here, that building area, but there's also a small building area in here where a lot or 2 might be able to go. So that's where the total number for 7 actually comes out of that location. So that's a scenario showing you what a first phase potential may be in terms of utilizing today's current zoning, making no changes in the zoning language to be able to achieve something in that location. So, and that would...
Bob, when you, excuse me, Bob,
Sure.
when you say, when you have it listed as municipal use 1
Yep.
and use 2,
Right.
you're not projecting that if we would use those terms to describe the new zone?
No, no, this is just in terms of what uses may
Like
occur in
The density
those.
would go from 40 to 20.
On that, it wouldn't be a density calculation. Okay, I identified those areas in the land area just for the purposes so we knew what we were looking at as far as a parcel area.
It's village residential, right?
It's all village residential. All we did in terms of the municipal use is areas where municipal activity could occur.
Okay.
We talked about the town hall. What we don't have is a program in terms of understanding how the new town hall would fit on the piece closest to North Street, which would make the most logical place to put it. what you also need as part of that facilities, you also need parking. So what we don't know is in terms of footprint, how much area you need for parking. Then you could do some additional parking in the upper area, and then on some of the earlier renditions of the plan, that being an area for public access to the open space as well. So an area for the public to park to get access to the open space. So the parking in itself wouldn't necessarily be all towards Town Hall itself in general. So it'd be multi-purpose in terms of the parking.
And Area A, which is also in village residential,
Yep.
that stays at 40,000 square feet.
This scenario is staying at the 40,000, but using the open space provision that you have, where you can actually reduce the lot size to 20,000 square feet, as long as you preserve a certain percentage as open space. It's similar to what Wallace Woods was. The lots are
I was
smaller.
just gonna ask you, so that was my next question.
Yeah.
So as the abutting Wallace Woods is denser than 40,000?
In terms of the lot area.
No, so
No,
I mean, it's
correct
not
that.
No,
any,
it's not.
it's not any denser,
No.
in that sense, the law,
So if you look at I'm gonna say the average lot size is gonna be somewhere between 15 to 20,000 square feet in Wallace Woods. But whatever the offset is, that was preserved in open space. So if you've got a 20,000 square foot lot, know that 20,000 square feet of extra land area went into the open space. So the overall density for the original parcel remains the same, even though you've got a smaller lot per se.
So to kind of further on that, where this particular one, as I said, we kind of extended
Right.
the lot lines out. Most of this is upland area in here, but there's that vernal pool that has the setback on it. You can utilize the upland area as part of your calculation, and then there's upland area in here where you really couldn't develop anything in terms of a house just because of the nature of what the upland configuration is. But when you take all the upland area and you take that, so the balance of the other 20,000 square feet is the open space, and then the development area actually
So
occurs.
that could help to be a buffer, if you would, between the two
Oh, yeah.
properties.
And actually, I think Wallace Woods green space actually is in this
Right
back
there, yeah.
corner, so.
Bob, I just want to understand how we went from 2.75 acres for the two pink areas
Yeah.
of A to the 6 or almost 7 acres. I think it's the wetlands and so
Yeah,
forth.
I had
are
included
now.
this when we were
So-
looking at that. And
so
the same
the-
thing on this.
So the buildable or the usable area in location A, which was previously those two,
Yeah.
is still 2.75 acres?
I had Braden do another calculation. I think we're a little over that.
A little over?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand it, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives you a scenario of a potential first phase. And I know when Tom gets in some of the marketing study, we had given him some numbers that will come out in terms of infrastructure costs at that point. So I won't go into that in any great detail.
So
Yeah.
could we take a pause
Yeah,
and get some committee feedback on?
that's what I was just going to ask. So
Yeah. Go right ahead.
comments?
Well-
Shall I start that side?
Okay, we'll start, you want to start then?
You can start.
Okay. I think that when I was looking at breaking those up into, recommended we break them up into sections, I was looking at,
You want to go back to the other slide?
I was looking at that one.
Yeah.
I was looking at thinking mixed use with assuming that we would probably get, or that the town people would vote for zoning changes, okay? So I was looking at, thinking that rather than have 40,000 square foot lots, that we would do something in our calculations to make sure that we can have mixed use homes, whether they're high-end or affordable or whatever we want to call them. I just thought that it'd be, the way that we should go about it, if this is the direction we're going to go, is that it should be mixed use and so forth, so it'd be more, a little bit more dense. And I was looking to
Do you mean mixed use or more multi-generational?
multi-general,
Because
okay,
mixed
that's
use
what,
to me
yeah.
is like retail.
No,
and-
no, yeah, I know,
I'd say mixed
multi-generational,
income.
excuse me,
Okay.
mixed income. Let's say mixed income, yeah, that's better. better. I just call it mixed use, but, okay. Now I lost my train of thought. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Mike.
You're talking about zoning changes to get the
The
density.
zoning change to get the density. And I was trying to, the original CDMK application, when I was when I was on the planning board, was for about 90 units, 96, 90, I don't.
The original layout that I just shown, that
was 90,
was 96. The actual
Then it went down to
was
80-something. So I was trying to get to about where we may have been in the number of units when it was originally
Right.
proposed. It would be much different, of course. But that's what I was trying to get at, because I don't remember everything from those years past, but I think that there became an acceptance of 90, I'm going to use 90 units in that area at one point in time.
Right.
And several points in time. So that's what I was trying to look at. I wasn't trying to get to the 225 houses or anything like that. I was just trying to say, and then the other thing I was trying to consider was, how do we go about if getting some of our investment back and preventing, the spending of additional funds for the infrastructure, et cetera, and how do we make it attractive? And I've read the latest report. How do we make it attractive for a developer to want to do multi-generational housing and so forth? And can we, at that rate, get some of the investment back up front and then some over time?
Right.
That's all. That's all I was trying to do.
Okay.
I think you reflected a lot of the comments that were uppermost in my mind. And I do, I think C is probably it strikes me as being the best development opportunity, the best way of attracting a developer in, to get them engaged in this and absorbing infrastructure costs and paying the town back perhaps for some of its acquisition cost. And I think we just have to be very creative with C. We have to find the right developer who can envision sort of a housing style that would incorporate. Someone from the public in the past mentioned the sort of New England farmhouse with
The extended type
with the barn and so on. And
Yeah.
if you think about that, it's not one house. It could be multiple units,
Right.
and it would be attractive. It would be familiar, and I think getting some density on C along the lines that Principal presented during the visioning session, I think would really make it work.
Yeah. Yes.
This looks great. I guess the only thing, I'm having a hard time figuring the difference in, like, when I see here on the first, a prospect for a potential first phase development, and even as you were talking, in some of them, it's in a certain area, it says there could be 4 lots here, there could be 9 lots.
And the reason we did that, we were asked to look at in phase 1 under current zoning, just so we
Right.
could give you an idea of what the current zoning really meant.
Okay, so.
And that's really the extent of what it was, and then also.
That just sounds so much smaller than what
Oh,
we're
it
talking
is.
about. I don't have a number in my head of how many lots overall or how many units but certainly it would be a long way to go to even get to the 80 or 90 it was once at 4
Exactly.
here and 9
Yeah.
here is not much of a development, so.
Right.
But that's assuming that they're stuck at what is the current zoning is for 40,000?
It's a 40,000 square foot, but you can go down to the 15 to 20, well, according, as Werner had explained, whatever the lot area you develop
Okay.
on, the balance of the 40,000 is preserved as open space.
So this is a sort of a baseline minimum, assuming there are no zoning changes or other
Correct.
configuration. Okay, that's helpful, and that's,
That being said, I'll turn to Werner in terms of the extended New England style. That wouldn't work in this scenario with the current zoning.
No, I mean, that's, and I think that's, these are common questions, I think, that a lot of New England communities are having and kind of working through. I mean, you have a lot of zoning that was created in the 70s that, largely in part followed the shoreline zoning regs that just kind of got sort of blanket adopted into communities, and that's where you wound up with 40,000 square foot lot sizes. I mean, that's, some folks have asked, well, how do communities come up with those sizes? And a lot of that was driven by shoreline zoning, which was that kind of first initial foray into zoning for the state of Maine. And then there were subsurface waste rules that triggered that 20,000. But, what communities have seen is that it doesn't, 40,000 square foot lot sizes don't lend itself to the development of a, traditional village. It just doesn't, those dimensional requirements of standards just don't work. If you were to,
Most people couldn't build their town villages based on current
that's right,
zoning.
yep. If you were to try to do that today, it wouldn't happen that way, so.
Great.
Jamie?
I think this is great, and the reason it's great, I think, is because it goes A to G. And so you could go like, could be soon to like, not a long time,
Yeah.
G. I appreciate the fact that we're talking about densities, and we're still on, if you would, south and west of the power line easement.
Yeah.
I want to remind us that we bought, this land was in theory purchased for posterity, and that we definitely have a need to show taxpayers a way with which to recoup some of the value.
Right.
However, if the two parcels A, which are municipal in design, are to be for future municipal needs, we're going to spend the money. It's not about recouping money. We've spent money, and the town will continue to spend money to make the town better.
Yeah.
This is a way to make the town better. Is it one of the largest things we've ever bought? For sure. Are we going to probably do it again? That's a great question.
Yeah.
But I do believe that it's important to be able to show the crawl, walk, run syndrome. And I think we're doing a very good job at that. We need to identify densities in order to get people at the table that might want to talk to the town about being a developing force. So far, I think you're doing very well. Thanks.
Okay. And to the point of the municipal, if you need a new town hall, if you didn't have this property, you'd be spending more money to go find a piece of property, so you already have that in your back pocket. You've already spent it, but you have it in your back
Exactly.
pocket.
So firstly, I would just like to say thank you for the data that was sent out last night, the market analysis and on job data. I really appreciated how comprehensive it was. It was interesting, illuminating, and thank you for obtaining that and providing it, because I think it helps us really understand why we're moving forward in this way. And it certainly, I felt the data answered the question on my mind, and I know the question that was on the public's mind of, if we build it, will they come? Yes, they will, according to the data. So that was really helpful as a newcomer to the area especially. I'm curious, I guess, in light of that, and especially in light of the sort of ebb and flow that it discusses in terms of the market for housing as well as the job market, how that will sort of shift back and forth and not remain at the high level that it is now, which is why we're feeling energized to build.
Right.
How does the project timeline in your mind sort of honor that, or, how we break these down over time, and again, in keeping with, keeping something for future development, future generations?
Your infrastructure is what's driving how you develop this. If we could bring in infrastructure from School Street to do one segment and vice versa and ultimately connect in the middle, you might look at it a little differently. But where your infrastructure is driving how the development proceeds through this, that really starts to control where you do your improvements. The market, while the market says, if you build it, they will come, what you need is the developers who are ready to build to have them come on. And you do. I think one of the comments that came out is finding a developer who's sensitive to what it means to be affordable. And I don't, and one of the comments I've had, and I just need to bring this to the table, is that even my wife said, stop using affordable and workforce housing because it's interpreted differently than what we are thinking as consultants as to what that market is. you mentioned affordable housing, and since I've been doing this for years, I've had projects where you say affordable and everybody thinks it's Section 8 housing, they come out of the woodwork to kill the project. That's not the area and the direction we're trying to drive. Yeah, there may be some subsidized as an option, but the affordability is really putting it into the market range that Tom's numbers are showing, that you can encourage people to come in, they can afford to live here, that also people who live in town and want to downsize have the ability to buy a piece of land. I think I said this comment before, there's a resident in this town, born in this town, would like to downsize and can't afford to buy a piece of property to build a house.
Right.
So those exist in town, so, and not necessarily looking at assisted living facilities, you know, whether or not that would even support it. You know, there's a lot of them. I mean, Kennebunk, we've had 3 assisted living facilities that have been constructed over the years. They're well occupied, but they still have a high turnover rate, so whether or not another one in like Kennebunkport could be supported, that's something else. So, but I mean, in terms of the residential, multi-generational neighborhood, you know, this is a great opportunity to do that, so. But the phasing, you're really starting in a crawl. You know, we had shown in the phase 1 scenario where I showed C being cut in half. So if you cut it in half, if you brought the utilities up to this point to be able to develop this, you don't have to extend the road at this point. You may wind up having to put a cul-de-sac temporary turnaround for emergency egress out, and then just have that as gravel so the fire department and police could actually get access through, but not for general public use. So that's a way of being able to incorporate some of these development phases. And then as you're ready to move forward, then you extend the utilities as they need to be extended.
So it can look like neighborhoods rather than something that's partially developed and
Right.
deal with the resident,
You know, I mean,
aesthetically.
I know some of the comments are, it looks like a bomb zone. And that is because when the developer was ready to move forward, he did the clearing for the lots, and by the time that project would have been finished, you wouldn't be thinking about it that way. Because it would be finished the same way if you move forward to develop a neighborhood. When you put your homes in and you do your landscaping and all your other site improvements, it changes the character. Right now, it's a character that people can't envision what it looks like. So, but that's essentially the way you would phase your type of development.
Thanks.
And getting a developer in, or multiple developers, to talk with the town to kind of guide some of their thinking process
Right.
and how they would do projects, so.
Thank you.
I've got 2 points. One goes back to Connie's point. I think that what this plainly shows us is we have to resolve ourselves to the fact that no matter what we do here, it's going to require zoning changes. And just by looking at the 4 lots, 7 lots, I think that cries out to us that we need to expand our thinking and decide that we're going to have to go for a zoning change, probably throughout the property. My second one is a little bit further off point right now, and that is that both in the, as you just put down on your notes, the affordable housing market at 270 to 360, I think the Housing Heritage Trust, and Lori can expand on this, has found that in order to have affordable housing for the market which is required, the 75% of the median, they have to stay under 300 and maybe not even that high. Is that correct, Lori? Is that
If you're
what
trying to be at 80% of the area median income, yeah, you would
Yeah.
want to be at the, below 270.
So I think we need to take another look at that and then figure that into our calculations about recoupment of costs and so on.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
How about you, Sheila?
Oh, for one comment, thank you. Yeah, my whole thought was the fact that I'm happy that the town has property that they will have for the future that we can expand on any time. I'm not really looking to, it wasn't my thing to develop it all up. My thing was that it was a perfect place, perfect land for the town to purchase for future activities. That's how I looked at it. So, this is all much more than I had intended.
So if we go back to your list of uses that you took away, so, I mean, this was what Tom took away from the steering committee comments. So I think it's good to check in with the steering committee if this is what they envision. So, I mean, we have one end of the spectrum, which would be to just save it all, to not develop any of it until it's needed and address that when it is, keeping in mind what it might take to get densities for the town to recoup infrastructure costs and things like that. I think you could use all this information, but one end would be, we don't really want to do anything in the foreseeable future. And the other end of the spectrum would be, we want to develop all of it, and this is how. And the middle ground might be that there's this phased approach. So, I mean, I want to make sure that the committee members are envisioning what they think the town should actually do, not just what, we're laying out here before you based on some feedback, but that this is why we bought the land and why, what we have in mind. And I think certainly we've heard that if we're gonna develop it or make uses, that the public's been pretty clear that they don't want additional costs or minimize those costs as much as possible. So I'm just curious on any other feedback on that from the committee.
I would jump in just to say, when I started this, and obviously my proximity to the property has me biased, but I started at the same point. I would much rather see land preserved for future use, especially in the current climate we're in, no pun intended, but that we preserve that land because we don't know what our future needs will be, especially being so close to the ocean. But I can appreciate from the data that it's really important that people who are going to make a living here can also afford to live here and be here and feel part of the town. And the fact that that is really challenging right now speaks to my heart a little bit. When I moved here, it was really difficult to find a job. It was difficult to find a house. So I can appreciate that there is a real need there that I was a little bit blind to when I first started this process. I think we just need to be really cautious in how we do move forward so that we're preserving as well as, answering that need in the best way that we can and ensuring that we're answering the need for the people who we intend it to be for, those who are intending to live and work here. And I think that's a concern from the public as well, that we've heard over and over, that it shouldn't be, summer housing.
Exactly. I think Werner put it well the last time, live, work, and play.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think if we come up with a viable plan for generating mixed or multi-generational housing, I think that that's a prudent thing to do, but I think that the planning is going to shake out whether or not it is practical to do what we want to do. And I think that if we go in it with the idea that, we want to do something about housing and absolutely preserve land, I think that's clear that we want to preserve land for the future. But during the planning process is when it's going to shake out whether or not it's going to be cost-effective for us, whether there's going to be added costs that we don't want to have, even whether or not we can get a developer to work. That's the biggest.
That's a key one.
That's the biggest hurdle. And you've got to have some type of a plan to present to the developer on the opportunities, not just for 7 houses here and 4 houses there. There's got to be a different opportunity. So, but all of that'll shake out. And it may be somewhere down the road we say we're going to pull back and wait a number of years. It may very well happen, but I think we should do the planning part of it.
I know everybody was, always kind of interested. During the visioning session, we put up the scenarios. Russ did the first broad brush, and then Braden and Julia worked on trying to make it look a little more like a neighborhood structure. And it was interesting during the visioning, as people were coming in and making comments, they liked it. And then we did the final, it was like, whoa, when they heard the numbers. So it's that visual perception of how things shake out. And doing that from the planning perspective, doing it at the 10,000-foot level, and then bringing that down to what the real needs are, what the concerns of the public are, to try and get you down to that final
Yeah.
level, so.
I think one of the things too, that as I was looking at this, and I'm a number cruncher, so I like to crunch numbers.
I could tell that by your comments.
I think we got to get our heads around the fact that it is unlikely, if we don't have a developer of some sort, that if we're looking at an average range price house, I used 500,000 because of some high end, low end, 270 or something was the lower end. And assuming a $10 per thousand mill rate, you're gonna get maybe $500,000 a year in taxes, and then there's other costs to offset that. So each year I'm talking, so it's you're looking at a long time payback. Now, those numbers will go up or down, and I know, but it just points all the more certain, I make all the more certain that we need to get that developer. Because if we don't get that developer, we don't want to be in the real estate business, the town. And so that's the only way I think it's going to work. That's my own opinion. And I agree with what Rebecca said as well.
I'm encouraged just in hearing, the talk, and it's kind of what I put in my comments, which was sort of that sense of, I feel like what we've been through that's been so essential is more, it's like a discovery phase. And I think that's important for people to hear, because I do feel like the words, we're going to have a master plan, freaks people out. It sounds like we're gonna have, the A to G all planned out, and this is what it's gonna be, and it's gonna look like those fully developed, and approved plans from the previous developer. And that isn't at all the intent at this point, and that we're not even necessarily, at this point, even working towards a master plan in that sense that I think people think of it. And so really what we've gone through is we've just unearthed so much important information from the community and from us, and then, all of this good data that we got recently as we kept saying, well, what does that look like? What does that cost? And people hopefully will feel more comfortable knowing that we may end up coming out just with sort of a potential map that looks like this, and we don't go any further yet, as we say, until we have developers that say, yeah, we want to get in on that, and here's what that could look like. It's all just kind of still concepts and potentials and sort of an idea map for the future, with some good data, better than
Exactly.
ideas. We
And that's
have
essentially what
data.
your master plan process is. So,
Okay.
as I said, we did the visioning session, and with the feedback we got, we put together a plan that, the whole concept was to create an extension of the village.
Right.
And looking at the New England village character of smaller lots, larger lots, that whole mixed, multi-generational type of neighborhood, to really give you an idea of what this property could look like and what can preserve this open space and how the whole thing becomes a part of the
Right.
community. And then being able to work your way back out of it, which is what I said, in terms of understanding. I mean, some of the lots on that visioning session, I think we were down at 3,000 square feet on a couple of lots. They were down really small. So, I mean,
Right.
we took that and then fine-tuned that and consecutively fine-tuned it, and then just started looking at the way now in terms of the bubbles, so.
That's good. I think I had assumed, and to me, master plan sounded, and just because I'm not in the development background, that it was like a blueprint, like here it is from start to finish, this is what it looks like, and this is where we'll be in 2 years and in 5 years. It's a real master plan, but it's not that concrete and that granular.
Yeah.
And so I think that's helpful for people to hear.
And with the comments about zoning is gonna have to change, that scenario helps you understand why you have to do that. In order to make the density work and preserve the amount of open space you want to try and preserve out of this. So it's a descending factors, best is the way I'd probably put it, going from the highest down to where you really want to be, so.
Are you ready?
Move on. Chris. Next steps. These are some comments that came from a bunch of different, and I try to keep them down as low as minimal as I could be able to go over. So top one, seeking formal input now from developers and land developers and builders on how they would approach the site. This is separate from issuing a formal RFP for someone to actually come in and take a portion of the site and develop it. So really, it's fact-finding that I think Mike and Tim and everybody's kind of equating to. Get someone to come in and say, okay, these are some of the thought processes we're going through. What are your thoughts? The part is finding a developer who has the goal, the objective, and the intent of creating the type of atmosphere you're looking for. You know, and there are builders out there, but it's identifying where that group is and what they can provide and bring to the table. Discuss various options with, it's almost a repetition, property developers. This discussion should be pointed towards various options from this. The committee determines how to recommend the land use ordinance to be amended if necessary. So basically, it's, you put the two of those together and a developer coming in and saying, well, in order for me to make this work, I need X number of square feet for a lot to make this thing work. So that kind of helps you get to that point. And then part of what we're trying to do is to reach a master plan consensus among committee members and present recommendations to the selectmen. And that also includes the public input that we've had. 4 is refine vision and plan for those portions of the site to be privately developed and launch rezoning process, including ratification by voters. The other one is explore feasibility and funding for perimeter walking trail that connects North Street to School Street. There are state grants and federal grant programs that are out there. You just have to find through them and find out whether or not you can qualify for them. So there are opportunities out there. And then finalize the facilities assessment for the town, i.e. the new town hall, the fire station, those things that have been talked about. Obviously, that component in terms of how the municipal use fits in, you really need to understand that. And Laurie and her group are actually doing that in terms of looking what those feasibilities are. So in terms of identifying where they could go, at least it targets it as a buttonhole, you know, and then that program comes on afterwards in terms of its financial feasibility. So, and then once we get to the end, is a presentation to the public. So, and then next for consideration, who will be responsible for checks and balances once the development is underway? And I think that's part and parcel to how they're developed, making sure these aren't going to become second homes or someone's going to come in and turn them into rental units, that type of thing. So, and I think some of that, we've had that discussion of possibly being able to integrate that into your zoning so you're able to manage that. And then cost analysis of various items in question. And again, that kind of comes afterwards. These I see as recommendations that become part of the master plan document. There are a number of the comments that came from everybody that would be almost like recommendations that come out of this master planning process, which would be the next step the town takes to look at how you're going to implement something on this site. So it wouldn't necessarily fall within the parameters of what our scope is to get you to a product at the end. So, because there are a lot of questions. I mean, Connie had 5 pages of questions for me.
You've answered 90% of them, maybe.
So, and then continue the planning process and discuss and develop preliminary plan recommendations for discussion with the Board of Selectmen. You know, and that almost comes after you get through the master planning process. You've identified, you know, from developers what some of the opportunities are, and then develop a scenario of what may happen where. So, all right. Next slide, Chris. Traffic and sewer. With sewer, Wright Pierce is the engineer for the town sewer department, and they completed an assessment of the sewer treatment plant in February this year. And I didn't pass that along to you because it's 14 pages of technical stuff that even I was having trouble trying to follow. But the bottom line is that there's capacity for 600 additional residential units in the town to be served by the sewer treatment plant. So at least that gives you kind of a program idea in terms of how many units could be accommodated in town that's within your sewered area. Then traffic, Goral Palmer had done the traffic study for Old Port Village. So basically, I've got to put a caveat on here. This is purely assumption-based on some of the old data and what we have for current knowledge. But this by no means is a traffic study. I mean, if we wanted to give you exactly what this was going to be, we'd be probably looking at about I forgot to ask Randy what it was, but it was over $10,000, I think, to do a traffic analysis, and this is a build-out in order to give you what those impacts are. But he felt pretty comfortable, one, it would not require a traffic light at that intersection. It wouldn't generate enough traffic to warrant a traffic signal. Plus, there are 11 warrants you have to meet for a traffic signal, and it's pretty hard to hit a lot of those, and some of them are real significant accidents. So the other is a possible need for a left turn lane, and that's primarily based on with the town hall because of the volume of traffic coming into there without being able to actually do the traffic study. It was more or less it ticked a red flag up in terms of Randy's thought process that it may, doesn't necessarily mean it would. There definitely would not need to be a right turnout lane, in order to make those maneuvers. Sight distance would need to be reevaluated, but I did talk to Randy after he gave me these comments. When the town went in and expanded the sidewalks out on North Street, they removed a lot of the vegetation that would impact sight distance. So that has already been, some of those issues have already been taken care of, and actually beyond what Old Port Village would have been responsible to do, because they would have had to do some thinning and removal of vegetation along that frontage. So the sight distance issue, and there haven't been any major signs put up that block someone's view type of thing. So it still would be an overall updated traffic study that would have to be done. You'd have to analyze it, but sight distance really isn't an issue out there based on the speed limit you have out there right now, 25 miles. So. He does not expect it to be a high crash location. He had solicited from DOT to get the crash information for the study they did in 2016 is what it was. And that information didn't come in time for him to give me that information, but he doesn't see that as a high crash area. So that would be one of the elements of warranting a traffic signal. It's one of 11 requirements. So from a traffic perspective, yeah, will traffic be slow out there? It's slow out there now. Will this development increase the overall flow? Yes. Will it increase the slowness of the traffic? Probably not that much more. And anybody who lives in there, if it's all the way through and knows what they're getting into, they're going to probably go out to School Street and to go where they want to go. So those are some of the parameters that would actually come out of, as you develop this property, as the development occurs, traffic study is going to be required. So you'll be able to pick up what those impacts would be as the development process goes up. And that would be part of your permitting process anyway. All right. Next one, Chris. Overview and summary of documentation from stakeholders. I don't know if we need to really go through all that, but we provided that information. What I did is we took the minutes from all the meetings with the stakeholders and tried to pull out what every one of the stakeholder groups made comments based on the questions we asked. And in that, there's a lot of similarity to the issues that we highlighted at the beginning in terms of what came out of visioning and stakeholder meetings and what some of the important issues are. So that kind of corroborates some of what we've been hearing, and the consistency is there. There are ups and downs in terms of, what opinions there are, but it still pretty much follows the pattern that we've been going through. And I need to grab this over here. Take the whole mess. The other thing that we sent out to you was the summary of that first public visioning session we had, in which we had the precedent images, we had people put dots on, and then we had 2 questions at the end in terms of, what would you like to see here, and 2, what would make it successful? And again, a lot of those comments have been the same transition all the way through this process. So I don't think we necessarily need to go through them unless you have questions on them. But the first public session we had, there were 33 people in attendance that night, and we had at least that responded to those questions. So there may have been more people here, but didn't pin anything up. But I do know there were couples here that they basically wrote one note and put it on the wall. So, but anyway, so that was a good crowd, and there was a lot of good comments that came back out of that to kind of guide the process. And then on the visioning session weekend, we had a questionnaire, and then Chris did a tabulation, which we sent out to you. And you could see by the responses that came back from the different items that were on that questionnaire, the ones that targeted in terms of what was most important. Housing was one, open space was another, preserving cost, making sure this is housing that's going to be used and it's not going to be rental housing, that type of thing. So So a lot of the data has been consistent in terms of the type of responses that have come through to help guide this whole process. So unless you want to go through any of that, we can move on.
I would like to say one thing about it.
Yeah.
I went through them all, and the two key things that were in there were affordable housing, mixed, I call it mixed use, you can call it what you want, housing.
Lori wants it
Lori wants to call it
multi-generational.
something different. Okay, so, almost exclusively, and then there was some things in there for singles housing. So it was almost every one of the stakeholders hit the housing issue.
Right. There's consistency, so. Anybody else? I don't even remember what my next slide is, Chris.
Tom,
I think it's Tom. Tom's up. Good, I can stop talking.
Thanks, Bob. So I'm Tom Duretsky. I'm with Camoin Associates. For those of you who don't know me yet, I was here about a month ago presenting on the market analysis portion, which went through what the demand is for different use types that could potentially go on the site. Today I'll be talking about the financial feasibility side of this analysis. So really looking at in terms of what the return for the town could be for this piece of land based on different development scenarios. So I just want to be clear up front. The numbers you'll see are illustrative. Obviously, there is no actual proposal for the land yet. So this is just based on current zoning, a hypothetical higher density scenario, and what kind of prevailing market rates look like. People have commented that it would be good to get developers involved and hear their point of view. I think that's a really good idea for them to kind of test what we're assuming here and see if our numbers are kind of in line with their thinking. But this kind of gets the conversation started in terms of what you could see for a return and kind of make your decisions armed with this information. I think it was on the desktop, Chris. Yeah.
I'm having a problem opening it up for some reason.
try right-clicking on it.
Gee, my thumb drive again.
Yeah, I'll take your, well, maybe anybody want to take a bathroom break? Gonna have to reboot. Moving target.
I got 20 of them open. Right.
There we go. All right.
So from beginning. Ta-da.
All right, so you can go to the next slide, please. So just quickly, what I'll talk about, what's the purpose of a financial feasibility analysis, go through what the town proceeds could be under various scenarios, talk about how affordable housing plays into this, and then just kind of summarize. Next slide. So as I said, the purpose of this, whereas last time we were talking about market analysis, what's the demand for different uses, this goes into what the financial return of those uses could be under different scenarios, and it shows what the fiscal implications to the town are of different decisions you might make for the future of the site. Next slide. So it's important to think of this as if you were a developer. So we know it's likely that if the town does decide to develop the parcel in some way that you'd be working with a developer to do this. So a developer obviously is going to look at how the return that could be generated for the site compares against the cost for development. So if I'm a developer, I'm going to look at all the numbers and say, okay, my ultimate finished product, I'm going to be able to sell homes at X price per square foot. It's going to cost me this much to do the infrastructure costs. So based on that, I'm willing to pay X amount for the land. So based on recent sales in Kennebunkport, especially more toward the village center, you're looking at homes selling at around $300 a square foot recently. So a typical housing developer is looking at making a margin of about 20%. So on that $300 a square foot in revenue from selling the home, they're going to want to make $60 for their profit, their return. And then construction costs for homes averages about $175 a square foot for the type of homes we're looking at in this area. So when you subtract out the margin and the construction costs, this $65 is how much a developer would be willing to spend on everything else that goes into development. So acquiring the land and putting in all the infrastructure. That's the max they're willing to spend. If they have to spend more than that, they're not going to consider the project.
So, based on what you have in here, what's the answer? Does it look good or not?
We'll get there. So this is similar to the maps that Bob showed earlier. So first we're looking as if this were developed in phases. So a hypothetical phase 1 goes about a third of the way into the property, the red area. It assumes that this could be that town hall and municipal use, and these areas would be developed as housing. Next slide. So obviously, a developer wants to build the most that they can. They want to maximize their return, so the more they can build, the better. Higher development potential means that the land is worth more. If I'm allowed to build more on the land is worth more to me. I'm willing to pay more. That means the town would get higher proceeds for the land. Obviously, higher density kind of correlates with higher land value and higher potential proceeds. The market potential, which we went into last time, there's a lot of demand in this community. That's why the prices are so high. That market potential, a developer might want to build hundreds of units if they could, is limited obviously by town zoning and the residential growth cap, which only allows a certain number of residential permits to be issued each year. So if we look at this under current zoning first, so this scenario for that phase 1 area, the first third of the site, it would be 20 1-acre lots or the equivalent density as we talked about before. The actual lots might be smaller, but there would be equivalent amount of preserved space. So the equivalent of 20 1-acre lots, 3,000 square foot home sizes, that would equate to an average selling price of 900,000 feet for a home. $900,000 for a home. When you do the math based on that formula we looked at before, 20 lots, 3,000 square feet per house, so that's a total of 60,000 square feet of building area. You divide that by the maximum site cost, which was the 65 we looked at before. That means if a developer could build that many homes, they would be willing to spend up to $3.9 million on land and infrastructure costs. We did estimates that Bob was able to provide for what the infrastructure costs would be. So for the main road, it's about $2.2 million, and then another $1 million for the secondary roads serving each of those lots. So you deduct that out, and the town proceeds. So this is how much the developer has left over and would be willing to spend on land, is about $700,000. So say somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million that the town would walk away with under current zoning.
And so can Bob just talk about the infrastructure costs a little bit in the secondary roads? We don't have a plan, but we came up with an estimate.
Yeah, with the secondary, what we did is utilizing that visioning plan that we did in terms of trying to look at the density. we tried to back our way through in terms of what we would expect for length of road to serve, the number of lots, units we were talking about. It's a conservative number, it could be less, but we took that, and then the roads would be narrow, so we had done a breakdown in terms of the main road cost because of the size of the road and the improvements that had to go in and include the pump station, which would be allocated on this. So the roads for the secondary costs really are the narrow roads. We eliminated the alley concept and just strictly went with a road configuration on that.
But it includes water.
Yeah, it includes everything. It'd just be just like what's coming after the main road. It would be those same services that went off to serve the development. Okay.
All right, so that was current zoning, and then we'll go to the next slide. Here we go into a hypothetical higher density scenario. So under this scenario, we're looking at 45 quarter and half acre lots. Smaller average home size of about 1,800 square foot, average selling price of $540K. Same math, here you're able to build more, so you have more that you're willing to spend on site costs. The infrastructure costs are a little higher in this scenario because you have more secondary roads serving more lots, about 600,000 more in this scenario. So that leaves town proceeds at about 1.5 million. So this just kind of gives you an idea that the more density that you allow, the more proceeds the town could potentially receive. Next slide. So this is just comparing the two. So under the higher density, this higher density scenario, you have a little more than double the amount of homes, 20 versus 45. The town gets about 750,000 more in proceeds, more density, higher town proceeds. All right, so next we'll talk about, if you go to the next slide, Chris, how does affordable housing play into this? So most developers don't necessarily want to build affordable housing because they're not going to be making as much of a margin on that. So some communities require affordable housing. In this potential development, if you issue an RFP, you could say that you strongly prefer affordable housing, but any way you do it, the numbers still have to work for the developer in some way. So if the developer is not able to make as much revenue, they're going to expect to pay less for the land. The land isn't worth as much to them because they can't build as much and make as much revenue. So we talked a little bit last time I was here about what the price points were for affordable housing. So for incomes at 80% to 100% of median income for the town. So that's roughly people in the households in the 50,000 a year to 100,000 a year income range. Affordable house price points for those folks are between 175,000 and 360,000. So that's, while in other communities that might be market rate, in Kennebunkport that is well below market rate. Those price points are not going to be delivered by the market under current zoning. So if you want that price point of housing, there's going to have some subsidy involved. So here's just kind of the way it breaks out if a developer were to look at it. To get to that affordable range, you're looking at a sale price of around $200 a square foot versus $300, so considerably less. The construction costs are a little less for affordable, but not a lot less. And then the site costs are what they are. So here, while the developer is able to make a 20% margin on a market rate unit, on an affordable unit, it becomes negative. So in order for a developer to undertake this project, they're going to want to either build more market rate units to offset some of that cost, or they're going to want to pay less overall for the land. So it works out to be about $100,000 per unit in terms of reduction in town proceeds for each affordable unit that you want to include. So if you want to include 5 affordable units, take $500,000 out of the town proceeds that we calculated before. Next slide. So what this really comes down to when you're looking at the economics of it is a trade-off between community goals. Here's some of the goals we've heard. There might be others. So some folks want to maximize town proceeds, others want to provide affordable housing, preserve open space, reserve land for future use, site community facilities like a town hall, and others want to maintain community character. So some of these goals are kind of at odds. If you really want to maximize town proceeds, you're going to want to let a developer build as much as they want market rate, and the town can make a lot of money. But they won't provide any affordable housing. So if you want to provide some of that, the proceeds come down. If you want to reserve some of that space for open space, that's, there's absolutely value to that, but a developer doesn't see value in that. So it's really a question, how does the town value these different goals? You already made the $10 million investment in the land, so this is an opportunity to achieve some of these community goals. And that's kind of what we're asking you all to do. Kind of think about how you value those and what is the community saying to help you make your decision. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions around that. There is the report that Lori shared, I think, with the committee yesterday that kind of goes through the details of this. So happy to answer questions. Are we taking questions from the public or? Okay.
First, I was just going to request that we could get a copy of your presentation if
Sure.
possible. Thank you very much. That was interesting. And on the last slide, what is your recommendation for how we go about figuring those values out? And that's a really important point. How do we do it?
Yeah. So I think that's what this whole process has been so far, right? You as the committee are kind of leading that and representing what the public believes. But, I haven't been so involved in the public process piece of it. I can give you the numbers, but I don't know if anyone else has any response to that. Yeah.
I think there's a mix of housing that can achieve the profit for the developer. I just used your numbers from the last presentation where 25% could be affordable, and you had 25. You had a number of ranges up to, the first one was to 360,000 or something like that, and then you had another range and another range, and if you come up with the right mix in that say phase one, you can come to a $500,000 or thereabouts average price on a house, and I don't know how that fits into the numbers, but it's not impossible.
Right. You could have more higher end homes to balance out the lower end homes, but I think in the end that means greater density, any way you look at it.
Yeah, that's why I said, when I looked at it, I said it probably would take about 100 houses, 90 to 100 houses to do something like that. No question. There's no question it would take a greater density.
Tom, I think your town proceeds calculation is very much a function of average home size. And on the market rate units, if you bump those up 100 feet, 200 square feet, 300 square feet, you can get pretty close to holding at $1.5 million.
Yeah, that's true.
And do 20% affordable units.
That could be true. I mean, when you're getting up, those homes are then considerably more, you're getting up there in the price of the homes too.
Yeah.
It's what the
But
market
those are
will
the
bear.
market rate
True.
units where I would propose that you might want to explore increasing the size of those a bit, and it makes a difference on the town proceeds.
Yeah, that's true.
With your town square feet.
I'm curious in all this too, I don't know if the town, if we have any sort of data or thought about how many affordable houses, some sort of a target, are we thinking townwide, knowing that the housing, Heritage Housing Group is already talking about a goal of 25 houses by 2025. If they're doing that separately, how many more, and it's obviously, it's all, who knows how many young families want to move in, but when we talk about people that work here, that would love to live here, do we have any sort of target numbers, knowing how many houses we have total in Kennebunkport to begin with? Do we need 100 affordable houses, or do we need 30 affordable houses to be able to change the mix, the character of the town, get more young families in. I don't know what those numbers look like.
But if you go to page 14 of their presentation,
We've got some of that.
well, yeah, they broke it out by.
Oh, good, oh, good.
Yeah, so those there's kind of different questions there. What is the town's target versus how many could be filled if they exist?
Well, not so much how many could be filled, I just don't know if we have a target. I just don't know on numbers.
These
Right.
aren't
What we're
targets on
talking
14.
No, those
This
aren't
is market.
targets. Those are what,
market, yeah.
market
Yeah,
driven,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't believe the town has an official target, right, Lori?
No, I think that the town and the comprehensive plan, which is a normal target, has talked about 10% of housing.
Oh, okay.
But that's, I'd say there's nothing magical about that number.
Sure.
It's a common number that a lot of communities use as an affordable housing goal. We would have to determine how much of our current housing is affordable, and the reality is it's affordable as long as you bought it at a lower price and you continue to stay there. So it might be challenging to determine how many currently owned, but certainly anything on the market today would not meet that,
Right,
meet that
absolutely.
number.
Yeah, and obviously some are better than none, no matter where we get them, how we get them built. I just didn't know if, we don't wanna, if there is a concept of overbuilding affordable housing and then, you're cutting some of the, gains for the town financially when there, maybe there's always a market for them. I'm just, trying to get a sense.
On that, on the figure 3 and figure 4 on page 9 of the market was there like a breakdown of, like, the titles are where Kennebunkport workers live and where Kennebunkport residents work. Is there a breakdown of what those incomes look like to sort of analyze how that would break down to the need for affordable housing? Or is it just generally?
So, so the way the demand for affordable housing is calculated later in the report is based on if Kennebunkport had a proportional share of residents in those income groups as the region. So Kennebunkport has about 3.5% of the region's population. If you were to have 3.5% share of the residents in those affordable age groups, what that number would be. Your town is very desirable. If you had housing at those price points, there's no doubt it would get filled. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, so I was thinking more like, you have the percentages of breakdown of like people who work here but live outside of here. So are those, is that the market like we're trying to target,
I
right?
think that's, policy wise, that is the market you're trying to target, so that, you have more of a community, the people that work here are able to actually afford to live here as well. So I didn't break down, I didn't pull that number specifically, but, I think that's what, if you were to have a policy for affordable units on this site, and some communities do this where they would, if there is some kind of deed restriction on the houses, you could say, we only want people that work in Kennebunkport to be able to have these homes. You can do that.
I was thinking about in targets as well, and the fact that maybe if we're looking at areas A, B, and C as phase 1, then maybe the town should go so far as to identify what is the value they would like to recoup from developing phase 1. Instead of asking, how much can we get? Well, how much do you feel you need? And identify that number. In that case, you could go to developers and say, we already know what we are hoping to take out of this. If the density of the houses, of property, or density on the property of houses changes, or the infrastructure gets, that's something that you're gonna have to take up, because we've already determined that this is the value we'd like to recoup from phase 1. With that said, if zoning is a change, which it seems like it's going to be, is this new zone, we have 11 shoreline zones, and we have 11 non-shoreline zones, so now we're gonna have another zone. And is this zone going to be a zone that only affects free enterprise? In other words, any property, any future development in free enterprise can use this full zone to change its density. And if that's the case, it could be that the town has identified within this new zone exactly the way they'd like to see things progress, so that developers could then say, oh, I see, we do have affordable housing as part of this zone. It's not like we'd like you to, or you might want to, it's like, no, you will.
This is,
So that you begin to see, this development becomes a seed for the remainder of, let's just say, Free Enterprise, or somewhere else in town. It also leads to like, all you have to think about is phase one, and let's let history be the judge of phase 2, 6 to 10, or whatever.
Yeah, that could absolutely be a possibility.
I think identifying targets is important, even if it's just vague, and you're doing that, I'm not saying you're not. I see that.
Yeah, so hopefully this will kind of give you the kind of ballpark numbers that will help you arrive at those targets. You know, that's not for me to decide, it's for you all to decide. All right, I'll turn it back to Bob.
Give me a chance to get my voice back. All right. On the item I passed out earlier with the steering committee's comments, the last page, where did it go? The last page of that is basically a draft outline for the master plan. And that's more to tell you the structure of how this thing would be set up in terms of the executive summary and introduction to what to the plan, the public process summary, assessment summary, your recommendations, then implementation strategies. And part of that comes down to what we're talking about now in terms of how you want to look at this thing from a phasing, dealing with the market analysis, to come up with a plan. In a plan, you know, we talked about this really looking at it being more of the bubble type diagram. And this would be refined enough to identify what target areas are in terms of potential density, areas to be preserved or reserved until future needs or arise. So part of what we've been listening to this afternoon is what's going to help us to try and take your comments, try and go one more version of coming up with what that bubble diagram starts to look like. And then the implementation strategies, that's still something we need to fine tune as we pull out the information you folks have given us tonight, as well as some of the stuff we've taken throughout this entire process. And like I said, some of the comments, written comments we got from everybody, some of those are directed towards implementation strategies, or they're identifying what the issues are, and then we need to fine tune that in terms of how you would like to see this proceed. So that's another step we need to pull out of you in terms of, as we've given you this information, to come back with a refinement that we can send out and have you take a look at. So as I'm looking at this document right now, it's probably going to be about that thick, because attached in all that will be all the documents we've taken to date. All the plans that have been generated, all the minutes, all the other comments, the questionnaires and things like that. That'll be all become part of your appendix. There will be the supporting documentation as to what your final direction is. So I thought I'd sent this before, but I think that's when we tabled the meeting and didn't have it. So I don't think anybody's seen this until today. So, but I just wanted to be able to give you an idea, look at it. Don't have to give me answers right now, but if there's anything in there that you feel that, you know, we have either missed or you have questions about, you can give to us. So, can I see the agenda? The next one is schedule, and that's the $1 million question I have. Well, we should have been done today. There's a lot of work that we still need to try and pull together to get it to a point where we've got a document that you can take to the selectmen and have a review with them in terms of the plan. And then there are still some fine tuning elements after that. Some of the comments were received in terms of like dealing with developers and whatnot. It really is beyond the scope of what our process is. We were going to help identify potential developers and things like that. But to take that step in terms of actually bringing a developer in, working out some concept plans beyond what we had generated to this point is a little more detail. And I would see that really as talking about in terms of the goals, issues and the strategies of how to implement it, defining how you take those next steps to really define what that target area is, finding a developer that can do that type of mix. But I mean, we can help to identify what those are. Okay. Any questions on this? In terms of trying to refine, I'm looking at least till the end of November to be able to pull stuff together. After we take this information, I'll have to talk back with Lori and Werner to try and give you a timetable of when the next meeting will be. I promise it won't be on Thanksgiving, so
So you're looking at the week of the 18th or something like that?
probably in that target range, yes.
Is there anything else the committee is looking for? Besides what Bob's described?
I think we've got a lot of data to look at.
We have the
Hold on,
schools.
Steve, we don't have, excuse me, we don't have this map.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
We'll send this off to you so you do
Oh,
have
you
it.
don't have
We
that,
got
you're
it
right,
in some
you don't, you don't
yeah,
have
no,
it.
it's
Oh, maybe it's a
yeah.
What you don't have is this one with the areas labeled.
Yeah, and one of the, when it got reduced to this 9x11 size, it was, you couldn't read into the numbers in the boxes. So be
Yeah.
sensitive to minimizing.
It's 11 by 17 you should be able to read.
Right.
Yeah.
Question for Lori. The appendix listed in Bob's outline here includes the municipal needs assessment. I'm sorry if you said that before. When do you think that will be ready? Because that sort of informs the town hall decision, town hall possible location on this site.
I need to talk to David Graham. I mean, he's working on it, but in terms of whether it would be finalized by the end of November, you know, I'm thinking that might be a little soon. He is working on some conceptual plans, but he's
Okay.
also working on this building and whether or not this can be revamped. So I'm not sure that that timeline is gonna match up exactly.
Well, and again, with the appendix, I mean, if it's identified in there, and whether or not, you know, it's ready by the end of November, if all the other documentation is together. I guess the question I'll ask is obviously the assessment of the needs and everything. We've identified where it can go. David is working on trying to come up with a footprint that we can look at to identify, will it fit in that area? Can we do the whole program in the first area A? Or what do you need for the other? I mean, that part of information, hopefully, I think, wasn't his email, he might have something in the end of next week or something.
I mean, you know, I suspect we'll see something, you know, a preliminary sketch, middle of next week.
Yeah.
But I anticipate, I mean, there'll be some back and forth in terms
Right.
of refining.
But I mean, what it'll do is give us an idea in terms of to being able to guide you whether or not it'll fit on that area, and do you really need the upper area as to satisfy some of your parking needs? Is the biggest problem we have. Without knowing a rough footprint, it's kind of tough to plop the building in there and then figure out how the parking circulation gonna work around it, so. But your final market, I mean, your final needs assessment could be attached to this, you know, after we've basically buttoned everything else up, so.
I was just gonna, we may already have it, I can't remember, I know we discussed it at one of the public meetings, but do we have school data on projection of like current population and projection of future population in the schools in terms of like what their capacity is versus what they actually have right now?
I don't think we have that data.
It might be of interest, I think, if.
We could probably reach out to the school department to see if they can provide that information.
Write it, okay.
Yeah. They should,
Yeah, I mean, the school did
Do-
some
I was
analysis,
gonna
but
say,
it
do they-
was probably, I think,
I think we looked at
planning
it for that
decisions
housing.
did it. Yeah, I think it was probably 5 years ago.
Mhm.
Or maybe 6 now that it did it. So it's a little dated.
Yeah.
But I know for the enrollment task force, they've been doing some projections, so we can certainly ask them.
Thank you.
Roughly, right now, the consolidated school containing 220 kids and there are 100.
Yeah, that's what I'd heard, it was very small, so just another piece of data that might be helpful.
So, Bob, I know that we have this anecdotally and in various forms, But could you give us by the proposed Phase 1 areas, could you give us, if we change the zoning to X,
Right.
we could get this many units?
I can take a look at that.
Can we look at that by each one of those little units there and then start to think about how do we want to see that mix?
Sure. Yeah, we can try and do that for you. I can abstract it somewhat from the overall plan we did, the visioning session, and pull some of that apart for you.
I know we've got the data,
Yeah.
we could put it back.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? I will offer this. If you have questions, please email Lori and me so that if all of a sudden you think of something as you're driving home like I do, or wake up in the middle of the night like I do thinking about something, pass that on to us. It's just will help us along the way. Okay? Anything else, Laurie? Do you want to open to the public?
Yeah.
Public comment?
Yeah, yeah, please. If anybody has questions now, this is sort of the public time. Name, just your name and.
Yeah, Wayne Burbank, I live down at Goose Rocks Beach. Number one question is, why is this meeting held at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? I know quite a few people that would like to be here, but they either work or, a lot of older people around, so they got doctor's appointments and whatever, but.
It was agreed by the committee.
Yeah, it would be better if it was like 6 to 8 or whatever. That's a comment, but, and when will the minutes of the meeting be available on the website? Any,
We can post them.
yeah, okay. And this meeting is not set at like the first and third Tuesday or
No,
whatever.
no.
It's whenever they have information ready, which will be in November sometime, right? Can the town specify no summer housing or Airbnb to these units, or is that illegal?
That would be part of the zoning, whatever zoning parameters are set up when you start looking at your zoning changes.
Okay,
The legal question would obviously be part of when you do, anytime you do a zoning change, you wind up with your town legal authority looking at it to make sure you put the right I's, T's, and everything else in place.
and am I right in thinking that the zoning can only be changed at a regular town meeting, not a special town meeting? That's true, okay.
And just so you're clear on that, basically out of this master plan will come recommendations for zoning. It won't be coming up with the actual zone language
Okay.
that would be going to the voters. That would be
Okay.
a process that would be the next step after.
Now, I heard you mention upland area.
Right.
What is the definition of that? Is that
Dry area, how's that?
Dry area, that's good. I like dry, because there's not a lot of dry area there. But they built a new $100 million school in Sanford, right near where I used to live. And they had, Sebago Technics did it. And, I tried to sell them my land, but they weren't interested. But anyway, there was a lot of wetland there and vernal pools, and they had a big beaver pond and everything, right? Well, somehow, they finagled it somehow so that they took some wetlands from over here and they put them in with these wetlands, and then they could build over here. So they moved them around.
Right.
So that it worked.
Mhm.
This is so cut up, this land. I mean, you're talking four lots here and 7 lots there. Is there any way that, without an act of God, that you could change some of those wetland areas?
Speechless.
Yeah.
No, I've gone through this.
It's
I mean,
who you
I've-
know, right?
No, I've done mitigation projects, where we've actually created an acre of wetland to compensate for an acre of disturbance. But it's a challenge. I mean, it's a big hurdle to be able to go through that type of process, because the science has changed so much and the regulatory agencies look at it a little closer because there were numbers that were actually failures. So sometimes they're a little shy on making some of those. I mean, this one already has about an acre and a quarter of wetland that were impacted for the prior development. And 25 acres was put as dedicated open space, which is actually part of a Blandings Turtle Preserve in Biddeford.
So there's more than an acre and a half of wetland on
Oh,
there?
there's 16 acres of total wetland
Okay.
on the site.
Now, didn't you
Broken up
say
through.
that the future town office or municipal office, would be better to have it down on the North Street end, right?
Yes.
But that's kind of cut up. Now, the blue areas, are those wetland areas, or?
No, that's development area.
That's development area. But can you, so the green areas are the wet areas?
Not all, no. The green areas are identified as being open space. In this case here, this particular area is open space, but there is a stream corridor that runs through there, and then there's regulatory setbacks from the stream in here, as well as wetlands. So those areas are basically, for the concept plan, are
Yeah.
held out as open space.
Well, I know you said it would be better to have the municipal building on the North Street end.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility of, instead of having all those little pieces of land, to take out some wetlands and make it big enough so you could have parking and everything on that end? Otherwise, I mean, you don't want the municipal building in the middle of the damn project.
Correct. And what we're waiting for is a footprint.
Just fill it.
The building, I mean, if, one of the earlier renditions I had shown of a plan for the prior development, there was a 4-unit multiplex building that was located on that site, and there was a lot of land area around it. I wouldn't expect the footprint of the town hall to be that same size, but being able to identify the footprint and then just how much land area would be required to meet the parking requirements. That's why we identified both areas, because we didn't have anything. The second one would be to provide some additional parking to serve it, but you could get the building and some parking in there, but the full extent of what that is, we can't answer at this point.
So with all that wetland, the former owner, CDMK,
Yep.
was approved to put 80 units in there?
Correct.
Amazing.
80 units, and I think we had almost 30 acres of preserved open space area.
Well, I mean, personally, I can't imagine that any developer would be interested without way lowering the zoning, because they're not gonna make any money out of it. You know, it's gonna be way less than 20,000 square feet of that.
And that's part of what the discussion has been on.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Everybody keeps referencing $10 million that we paid for this, but it's really 14 million when you figure the interest on that. We should say 14 million, it's not 10 million, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Just me?
Yeah, quick question for you. Steve George's Blue Farm Road. I just had an actual question for Tom. The total demand in the executive summary, where do the figures come from for that?
So that's all explained in the report, but that's based on data from the census and other sources that looks at projected household growth in the region and so forth.
So it doesn't come from like Zillow, multiple listing, actual transactions of people moving? This is just
You're talking,
a projection of
right,
what
this is
someone
based on,
thinks
this
this
is
could.
based on state and other sources of population growth, yep.
All right. You were right. I should not have interrupted you. It's all in there. I really, and I appreciate it. I'm sorry that I interrupted you, Tom.
No problem.
Hi, Pat George's Port Farm Road also. My question is, will the voters and the taxpayers in the town, and I'm not sure who to direct this to, maybe Sheila or Lori, will we get to vote on the final outcome of this?
If there would be any zoning changes, that would be a vote of the townspeople, or if the town was to dispose of any land, sell it or anything, that would be a vote of the town as well.
What about any significant expenditures?
Yeah, well, that would have to go through a budget process, so that would get approved by the town.
That would get approved, that would be on the ballot, or it would be a
It would be
special
part of the
meeting?
budget. It
Pardon?
would be part of the budget.
So the annual town meeting,
Right.
The annual town meeting,
a real town meeting?
a real town meeting.
Well, they're all real.
Except you're not notified for some of them.
Oh, well, you should have been.
They weren't.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Linda Esser, Squire Lane. I guess this is more theoretical than numbers and practical, but other than some kind of utopian something, why would I understand how you could sell affordable housing, but why would you want to build a high-end house in affordable housing? Why would you? How would you sell those?
You want to?
So those kind of mixed income developments have become more and more popular as people are realizing that, you know, it's kind of a good thing to live near people that have different lifestyles than you. I mean, we're not talking about Section 8 housing. We're talking about people making $50,000 to $100,000 a year. So they absolutely do have those types of developments.
We have it now, all over town.
All over
It seems to me
town.
when we drive around, it fairly.
I think part of that goes back to the comment I made earlier, that if you use affordable housing, it's interpreted differently by people.
So, we're all done?
Are we done? Yeah. All right, if there are no more questions, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank
you
you,
all.
everybody, and thank you all for coming.
Oh, so we don't have a date yet, right, in November? We'll find out.